Culiacán, the capital of the Mexican state of Sinaloa, the morning of the 9th of September, 2024. For more than 30 years, this city had been the beating heart of the most powerful criminal organization on earth. It was the home ground of the Sinaloa Cartel, and the city where its bosses were born, where its money flowed, where, by an unwritten arrangement that had held for decades, a certain order always prevailed. Culiacán had seen violence before. It had seen the army roll in, seen shootouts, seen the bad days. But it had never seen this. At dawn, a convoy of the Mexican army encountered a group of armed men in a neighborhood on the east side of the city, a stronghold of one cartel faction. Shots were exchanged. A soldier was killed. And within hours, the violence spread across Culiacán like a fire jumping from rooftop to rooftop. By midday, the city was a war zone. Not a war between the cartel and the government. Not a war between the Sinaloa Cartel and some outside rival. Something far stranger and far more dangerous than either. The Sinaloa Cartel had gone to war with itself. Gunmen set up roadblocks across the city. They stopped ordinary civilians and searched their phones, scrolling through the contacts, looking for any name that might link the owner to the other side. They hijacked vehicles and seized armored trucks. They left bodies in the streets, marked with symbols that told everyone watching which faction had done the killing. Schools shut their doors. Businesses pulled down their shutters. Parents kept their children inside. The residents of Culiacán, caught between two armies that had until very recently flown the exact same flag, locked their doors and waited for an end that more than a year and a half later still has not come. This is the story of how the most powerful drug cartel in the world began to tear itself apart, and of the single act of betrayal that lit the fuse. Because the war that erupted in Culiacán on that September morning did not come from nowhere. It came from a meeting weeks earlier on a ranch on the outskirts of that same city. A meeting that one of the two founders of the Sinaloa Cartel walked into and never walked out of. To understand the war, you first have to understand the partnership it destroyed. The Sinaloa Cartel was built over decades by two men. The first was Joaquin Guzman El Chapo, the showman, the escape artist, the most famous drug lord in the world, the man who tunneled out of one prison and walked out of another, and who is today serving a life sentence in a maximum security cell in the United States. The second was his partner, Ismael Zambada El Mayo, the ghost, the strategist, the quiet one, the man who avoided the spotlight for half a century and in nearly 50 years at the top of the trade was never once arrested. Together, they were the cartel. They balanced each other, the famous one and the invisible one, the risk taker and the diplomat. And even after El Chapo was finally captured, extradited, tried, and sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars, the organization did not collapse. It endured because El Mayo was still out there, still in the mountains, still untouchable, still the steady hand at the center of everything. As long as El Mayo remained free, the Sinaloa Cartel held together. But beneath that calm surface, the organization had already divided into two camps, and the divide ran along bloodlines. On one side were the sons of El Chapo, known collectively as Los Chapitos, the Little Chapos, and the faction loyal to them, called the Chapitza. A younger, more reckless generation, Ivan Archivaldo, Jesus Alfredo, Ovidio, and Joaquin Guzman Lopez. They had grown up inside the cartel, inherited their father's name and his ambition, and become, according to United States authorities, central players in the trafficking of fentanyl, the synthetic drug that has devastated communities across the United States. On the other side stood the people loyal to El Mayo, the Maiza, the old guard, the traditionalists, eventually led by El Mayo's own son, Ismael Zambada Siqueiros. These were the men aligned with the founder who had kept the peace for 50 years, who remembered how the cartel was supposed to work. The contrast between the two camps was not only about loyalty, it was about how each saw the future of the cartel. The Chapitos were aggressive, modern, and unafraid of the spotlight, embracing the fentanyl trade and the social media bravado that came with it. The Maiza were cautious, discreet, and traditional, schooled in El Mayo's lifelong philosophy that the cartel survived by staying invisible and avoiding unnecessary heat. These were two fundamentally different visions of the same organization, held in check only by the personal authority of the one man both sides still respected. Remove him, and there would be nothing left to hold them together. For years, the two camps coexisted under one banner, held together by mutual profit and by the steadying presence of El Mayo himself. But the cracks were widening, and there were two moments before the war ever began that revealed exactly how deep they ran. The first came in 2019. The Mexican government captured Ovidio Guzman, one of El Chapo's sons, in Culiacán. The response was instant and overwhelming. The Chapitos faction flooded the city with gunmen, set up burning blockades, surrounded military housing, and threatened the families of the soldiers involved. Highways were cut. Gunfire echoed for hours across the city. Faced with the prospect of a massacre in the middle of a major urban center, the government made the extraordinary decision to release him rather than see Culiacán burn. The episode became known as the First Culiacanazo, and it was a staggering display of raw power, a single faction forcing the Mexican state itself to back down and hand back its prisoner. It announced to everyone watching, inside the cartel and out, exactly who really controlled that city. The second moment came in early 2023. This time, after an operation it had been planning for more than a year, the government tried again and succeeded in recapturing Ovidio and getting him out of the state before the cartel could force another release. Once more, the Chapitos besieged Culiacán, burning vehicles and turning the city into a battleground to pressure the authorities into letting their leader go. But this time, the government held, and Ovidio was gone. And in the middle of that crisis, something quietly revealing happened. The Chapitos turned to the Maiza, their supposed partners within the same cartel, and asked them for help. And the Maiza refused. That refusal opened a wound between the two factions that never healed. From that point on, the partnership that had built the cartel was, in truth, two separate organizations wearing the same name, watching each other across a line that grew sharper and more dangerous with every passing month. All it would take to turn that wound into open war was a single, unforgivable act of betrayal. That act came on the 25th of July, 2024. According to the account that emerged afterward, El Mayo Zambada the Ghost, the man who had eluded capture for 5 decades, was invited to a meeting at a ranch on the outskirts of Culiacán. The pretext, according to a letter El Mayo later released through his American lawyer, was a political dispute that he had been asked to help mediate a quarrel involving the governor of Sinaloa and a rival politician. It was exactly the kind of role El Mayo had played for decades. The trusted elder, the keeper of the peace, the man both sides would come to. But it was a trap. Waiting for him, according to U.S. authorities, was Joaquin Guzman Lopez, the son of his own founding partner, El Chapo. El Mayo was seized at that meeting, forced onto a small plane and flown north across the border, where American agents were waiting to arrest him. He was taken into custody in El Paso, Texas, and Joaquin Guzman Lopez surrendered to the Americans on that very same day as he handed El Mayo over. The United States ambassador to Mexico would later confirm the heart of it, that Zambada had been taken to the United States against his will, while Guzman Lopez had surrendered voluntarily. The most untouchable man in the entire history of the Mexican drug trade had been brought down not by an army, not by years of investigation, but by the son of the very partner with whom he had built the cartel. And the politician whose dispute had served as the bait for that meeting was killed the same day. In the letter his lawyer later released, El Mayo gave his own account of that day, describing how he had been ambushed at the meeting, restrained, and forced onto the plane against his will. He named the men he held responsible, and his account turned a private betrayal into a public accusation aimed squarely at the son of his own partner. Why Joaquin Guzman Lopez did it remains one of the great unanswered questions of the entire case. Some analysts have speculated that he was seeking leverage with the United States, where he and his brothers faced overwhelming charges over the cartel's fentanyl operations, that delivering the most wanted man in Mexico was the price of a softer landing for himself. Others suspect a deeper power play, an attempt to remove the one figure whose authority stood above the Chapitos and to clear their path to sole control of the cartel. Whatever the true motive, the effect was identical. The careful balance El Mayo had maintained for 50 years was gone in a single afternoon, and nothing remained to keep the two halves of the cartel from each other's throats. For weeks afterward, an uneasy, brittle calm hung over Sinaloa. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone understood what it meant. The two founding families could not share a banner after this, not after one had handed the other to a foreign government. The only question was when the violence would begin. It began on the 9th of September, in Culiacán, with a dead soldier and a city set ablaze. And it has not stopped since. The war that followed pitted the two factions against each other across the state of Sinaloa and beyond. The Chapiza, loyal to El Chapo's sons, held their strongholds in Culiacán and along the Pacific coast, reaching into Sonora and Baja California. The Mayiza, loyal to El Mayo's son, fought to expand along that same coast and to push into the territory the Chapitos had long dominated. The map was being redrawn in blood town by town, road by road, neighborhood by neighborhood. The violence developed a grim symbolic language all its own. The bodies left in the streets were marked with objects that signaled which side was responsible: sombreros for one faction, slices of pizza for the other, so that anyone who found them would understand the message instantly. Narco blockades appeared along the federal highways that run through the state. Remote towns in the mountains emptied as residents fled the fighting. One small community was abandoned so completely that it became a ghost town. Even the press came under fire. The offices of a Culiacán newspaper were shot at, and one of its delivery men was ambushed and taken. The fear that had once belonged only to those inside the trade now reached every family in the city. To live in Culiacán during those months was to live inside a war with no front line. Gunmen at improvised checkpoints would stop drivers and demand their phones, scrolling through contacts and photographs for any sign of a connection to the rival faction. The wrong name, the wrong save number, could be a death sentence. Convoys of armored trucks moved openly through residential streets. Families learned the sound of distant gunfire and the routes to avoid. Shops closed for days at a time, and deliveries of food and fuel into the city slowed to a trickle. Ordinary people who had nothing to do with the cartel found themselves rationing supplies, keeping their children home from school, and reading the messages the factions left across the city on banners strung over avenues, in videos posted online, and in the bodies they displayed in public to claim their kills. A city of nearly 1 million people had been turned into the board, on which two halves of one family played out their war. The damage went far beyond the violence itself. Culiacán, a city that had quietly grown prosperous in the long shadow of the cartel, began to come apart at the economic seams. Businesses that had operated for years closed their doors or fled the state entirely. Public celebrations were canceled. The car dealerships, the restaurants, the nightlife that had once thrived on cartel money emptied out. Investment stalled. By some estimates, tens of thousands of jobs were lost as the conflict dragged on month after month, and a city that had learned to live alongside the trade discovered what happened when the trade turned on itself. For decades, the people of Sinaloa had paid the moral cost of being the cartel's home. Now they were paying the economic one, as well, trapped in the collapse of an arrangement they had never been allowed to vote on and could not escape. The human cost has been staggering. According to figures cited in international reporting, the war between the Chapitos and the Mayiza has left more than 5,000 people dead or disappeared across Sinaloa, and it has been grinding on for more than 18 months, with no clear end in sight. An entire state, the historic heartland of the most powerful cartel on earth, turned into a battlefield by the collapse of one partnership. And the consequences have reached far beyond Sinaloa's borders. At the center of the war was the trade that had made the Chapitos so powerful and so wanted: fentanyl. According to U.S. authorities, El Chapo's sons had pushed the Sinaloa Cartel deep into the synthetic drug business, importing precursor chemicals from abroad, manufacturing the drug in clandestine laboratories, and smuggling it north across the border into the United States, where it has driven one of the worst overdose crises in American history. It was that machinery and the staggering money it generated that raised the stakes of the internal war to the level it reached. The two factions were not only fighting over a name and a homeland, they were fighting over control of the most profitable and most lethal product the cartel had ever moved. The war also exposed, in the most public way imaginable, just how deeply the cartel had burrowed into the Mexican state itself. A United States indictment alleged that the governor of Sinaloa had struck a deal with the cartel to win his election years earlier, an accusation that grew directly out of the same sprawling investigation into El Chapo's sons and their fentanyl operations. As of this telling, the Mexican government has declined to act on the American request to hand the former governor over, insisting that it needs more proof. It is a reminder that the line between the cartel and the institutions meant to fight it has never been as clean as either government would like the world to believe. The fragmentation also created opportunity for everyone else. As the Sinaloa Cartel turned inward and began to devour itself, its rivals moved to exploit the chaos. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the great rival of the post-El Chapo era, maneuvered to take advantage of its enemy's collapse. Smaller organizations pressed in from Sonora and from the mountains of Chihuahua, where the relocation of Sinaloa's fighters to the Culiacán front left other territories exposed and triggered fresh waves of violence and displacement. The fall of the cartel that had dominated the map for 30 years did not bring peace. It created a vacuum, and in the Mexican drug trade, a vacuum is never an ending. It is only the opening of the next war. For Mexico as a whole, the implications were enormous. For years, an uneasy and brutal equilibrium had held between the country's two dominant criminal powers, the Sinaloa Cartel and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. That balance, however violent, had imposed a kind of grim order on the map. Now both of those powers were in crisis at the very same moment. Sinaloa tearing itself apart from within, and Jalisco facing the death of the leader who had built it. Analysts warned that the simultaneous weakening of both giants could break one of two ways toward a fragile opening for peace, or toward a chaotic free-for-all. As dozens of smaller organizations rushed to seize the territory the giants could no longer hold. The collapse of a monopoly does not always bring relief. Sometimes it simply multiplies the number of people willing to kill for whatever is left. Even the death of a rival kingpin folded back into the story. In February of 2026, El Mencho, the leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, was killed in a military operation. And reports suggested that, before his death, an alliance had been taking shape between his organization and the Chapitos, brokered under his own supervision. His death raised an immediate question. Would that alliance hold under his successor? Or would its collapse pour even more fuel onto the fire? As always in this world, the wars were tangled together, each conflict bleeding into the next, no single thread ever fully separate from the rest. And at the center of it all, the men who had built the empire were gone. El Chapo, serving life in a cell in Colorado. El Mayo, who pleaded guilty in an American court and faces the end of his life behind bars. Ovidio and Joaquin Guzman Lopez, El Chapo's sons, both in United States custody, both having pleaded guilty under agreements and now awaiting sentencing. The founders and the heirs alike, swept off the board, and yet the war raged on without any of them. Fought by the factions and the foot soldiers and the families they had left behind. The empire was destroying itself, and not one of the men who had built it was there to stop it. And so we are left, as we so often are with these stories, with a set of questions that may never have clean answers. Can the Sinaloa Cartel survive a war against itself, or has the partnership at its foundation been broken too completely to ever be repaired? Was the betrayal of El Mayo a purely personal act of ambition, or one part of a larger arrangement whose full shape we still cannot see? And what, exactly, did El Chapo's son believe he would gain by handing over his father's partner? How far up into the Mexican government does the cartel's influence truly reach, if a sitting governor could be accused of owing his very election to it? And when this war finally ends, and one faction emerges from the ruins, how long before that victor, too, is torn apart from within? The way every great cartel on the map eventually has been? Some of those answers may emerge in the courtrooms and the streets of the years ahead. Others, as so often happens in the history of organized crime in Mexico, may never come at all. What is certain is this: the Sinaloa Cartel was the great survivor of the Mexican drug trade. It outlasted Tijuana. It outlasted Juarez. It outlasted the Beltran Leyva brothers, who had once been family. It outlasted the capture, the extradition, and the life sentence of El Chapo himself. For 30 years, it won every war it ever fought, because at its very center stood a partnership between two men who trusted each other enough to share an empire. And in the end, it was that partnership, the one thing that had held all of it together, that broke. Not in a battle with a rival, not in a raid by the army, but in a meeting on a ranch, where the son of one founder handed the other founder to a foreign government and lit a fire in the cartel's own home that has been burning ever since. The empire that conquered everything could not survive the one enemy it never planned for: itself. The map of Mexico has watched many cartels rise and fall, but the fall of the Sinaloa Cartel, if that is truly what we are witnessing, is unlike all the others. It is not being destroyed by its enemies, or by the state, or by the United States. It is being destroyed by its own blood. If this story showed you the hidden complexity behind the headlines, subscribe to Sleeping Crimes. Every week, we unravel the stories we need to understand, not to glorify crime, but to understand its real impact. Turn on notifications. We'll see you at the next crime.